We have some breaking news to share with you. The Department of Justice says it has uncovered, and I'm quoting here, 1 million more documents potentially related to the Jeffrey Epstein case. Caitlin Polance is here. Caitlin, with these documents, do we know if they're above and beyond all of the ones that they already have? And if so, what that's going to mean to the release?
Yeah, this is quite a Christmas news drop, Sarah. The Justice Department now revealing that they are still discovering files from Jeffrey Epstein and all of the different parts of the Justice Department that had files related to him in various investigations. In this statement, this was just out about 20 minutes ago, the Justice Department now says the Southern District of New York, so that's their prosecutor's office out of Manhattan, and the FBI have informed the Department of Justice they've uncovered over 1 million more documents potentially related to the Jeffrey Epstein case. The impact there, it means that the Department of Justice is going to be processing these before they can all be posted transparently under the law for weeks. Here's a little bit more of the statement. We have lawyers working around the clock to review and make the legally required redactions to protect victims, and we will release the documents as soon as possible. Due to the mass volume of material, this process may take a few more weeks. This comes on the heels as well of yesterday, prosecutors in the Southern District of Florida, so in and around Miami, being asked to volunteer their time and jump on board the group that is already looking at these Epstein files. This email from leadership in the department said they needed volunteers. It was an emergency. They understood it was the holidays, but there are more documents than they have enough people to reviewing right now. They need more hands on deck. Sarah?
Hold on. Stop everything. We need to talk about what just happened because this is absolutely stunning, and it confirms every single thing critics have been saying about how the Justice Department is handling the Epstein files. The DOJ just announced, on Christmas Day no less, that they've discovered over 1 million more documents potentially related to Jeffrey Epstein. 1 million additional documents that they somehow didn't know existed until after the legal deadline for releasing everything had already passed. And if you believe that's just an innocent mistake, if you think this is simply bureaucratic incompetence, then I have a bridge to sell you, because this is the most transparent cover-up I've seen in years. Let me walk you through exactly what's happening here, because the timeline matters and the details reveal a pattern of deliberate obstruction. Congress passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act with overwhelming bipartisan support. One vote against it in the House, unanimous in the Senate. The law was crystal clear. The Justice Department had 30 days from when Trump signed it to release all documents related to the Epstein investigation, except materials that would harm victims, compromise national security, or involve ongoing investigations. The deadline was last Friday. That was the mandated date when everything was supposed to be public and available to the American people. And what did the Justice Department do? They missed that deadline, completely blew past it, released a tiny fraction of the documents in carefully managed tranches with heavy redactions and obvious political considerations about what gets released when. And then on Christmas Day, when most people aren't paying attention to the news, when Congress is on recess and reporters are with their families, the DOJ drops this bombshell announcement. Oh, by the way, we just found 1 million more documents. We had no idea these existed. We're going to need a few more weeks to review them. Sorry about that. By the way, I am trying to do my best to gather all the information I can for you and share it with you. Please leave your likes and comments, and I would be grateful if you subscribed. Let's continue. Does anyone actually believe this? Does anyone think the Justice Department, which has been investigating Jeffrey Epstein for years, which prosecuted him and Ghislaine Maxwell, which has had access to all of his files and records and communications, somehow just discovered 1 million documents they didn't know about? These documents supposedly came from the Southern District of New York, the office that prosecuted both Epstein and Maxwell. So we're expected to believe that the prosecutors who built criminal cases against these people somehow didn't know about 1 million documents in their own files until after the legal deadline for releasing everything had passed. That's not incompetence. That's deliberate. That's a strategy. You wait until after you've blown the deadline, then you announce you found massive amounts of additional material that will take weeks or months more to process. That gives you cover for the delay. That gives you an excuse for why you couldn't comply with the law, and it muddies the waters about whether you were ever seriously trying to meet your legal obligations in the first place. Let's talk about what was actually required here, because the Justice Department is acting like they were given an impossible task. They claim 30 days wasn't nearly enough time to review all the material. But here's what we know for a fact. The DOJ told Congress back in July that they'd already reviewed all the Epstein documents and found no basis for bringing additional charges. So they'd already been through this material. They already knew what was in it. They already categorized it and made decisions about its relevance to potential prosecutions. The idea that they suddenly need months to review materials they've already reviewed is absurd on its face. And then there's the question of resources. The Justice Department revealed yesterday that they had to email prosecutors in the Southern District of Florida asking them to volunteer to work through the holidays on redactions. They acknowledged it was an emergency and they understood it was the holiday season, but they desperately needed more hands on deck. Think about what that admission reveals. The Justice Department, with thousands of lawyers and unlimited resources and months of advance notice that this deadline was coming, didn't properly staff this project until the last minute. They didn't allocate adequate resources. They didn't treat compliance with the federal law as a priority. Why not? Why wouldn't you properly staff a project that Congress mandated with overwhelming bipartisan support and that the president signed into law? The only logical explanation is that they never intended to meet the deadline. They never planned to comply fully with what the law required. They decided from the beginning that they would slow roll this release, control what information came out and when, and deal with the political fallout of non-compliance rather than actually following the law. And we can see their priorities crystal clear in how they've handled different pieces of information. When documents came out showing Bill Clinton with Epstein and Maxwell in compromising situations, the White House amplified them. They tweeted out photos of Clinton in a hot tub. They made sure everyone saw that material. They wanted maximum attention on Clinton's connections to Epstein. But when the most damaging material about Trump came out, the response was completely different. The Justice Department used its official social media accounts to defend Trump. They released statements claiming accusations against him were false and unfounded. They pulled down and reposted documents under the guise of protecting victims. That tells you everything about what's actually happening here. This isn't a good faith effort to comply with transparency requirements. This is a political operation designed to damage Trump's enemies while protecting Trump himself. And they're using the slow release and heavy redactions and claims about needing more time as tools to manage that political objective. Congressman Robert Garcia released a statement that gets right to the heart of this. He said the White House is openly engaged in a cover-up protecting Epstein's co-conspirators and the powerful men who abused women and girls. He called it outrageous that the DOJ has illegally withheld over 1 million documents from the public. And he's absolutely right. This is a cover-up. It's not even a subtle one. They're just counting on people being too distracted or too partisan to care that a federal law is being flagrantly violated. Think about the absurdity of what we're being told. The Justice Department claims they have lawyers working around the clock to review documents and make legally required redactions. But they also claim they just discovered 1 million documents they didn't know existed. So which is it? Were these lawyers working around the clock on materials they'd already identified? Or are there massive caches of documents that nobody knew about until convenient timing after the deadline passed? You can't have it both ways. Either they knew what documents existed and failed to allocate resources properly to review them, or they didn't know what documents existed, which would be stunning incompetence in an investigation they've been conducting for years. And let's talk about that January 3rd deadline because it's important. The law requires that by January 3rd, the Justice Department must report to Congress explaining every redaction they made and the legal justification for each one. That's the accountability mechanism built into the legislation. Congress wanted to make sure the DOJ couldn't just redact anything they felt like hiding. They had to justify each redaction under specific legal categories. But if the Justice Department hasn't even processed all the documents by January 3rd, if they're still discovering new caches of materials and claiming they need more weeks to review them, how can they possibly provide the required report to Congress? The answer is they can't. And that's probably the point. By creating this rolling crisis of newly discovered documents and inadequate resources and impossible timelines, they ensure they never have to actually comply with what the law requires. They can always claim they're working on it, they're doing their best, they just need a little more time. And meanwhile, weeks turn into months, public attention moves on, and the full truth about Trump's connections to Epstein stays buried under claims of ongoing processing and necessary redactions. Members of Congress are already talking about holding Attorney General Pam Bondi in contempt for missing the deadline. They're discussing going to court to force compliance. But all of that takes time and political will and sustained attention. And the Justice Department is betting that they can outlast congressional pressure through delay tactics and excuses about the volume of material and claims about protecting victims. Speaking of protecting victims, let's address that excuse directly because it's being used to justify everything. Yes, victim protection is important. Yes, materials that would identify or harm survivors of Epstein's abuse should be redacted. Nobody disputes that. But the law already accounts for that. The categories of allowed redactions are specific and limited. Child sexual abuse material, information that would harm victims, classified national security information, and material from ongoing investigations which the DOJ claims don't exist. That's it. Those are the only legal justifications for withholding information. So when the Justice Department claims they need weeks or months to review materials for potential redactions, what they're really saying is they're going through documents looking for ways to classify information under those protected categories, even if it's a stretch. They're over-redacting, as they admitted themselves, because over-redaction allows them to hide anything they find politically inconvenient while claiming they're just being cautious about victim protection. And we know they're over-redacting because victims themselves have said so. Survivors of Epstein's abuse have stated publicly that the Justice Department never consulted them about what would actually harm victims versus what the DOJ just wants to hide. They've called the process sloppy, inconsistent, and thoughtless. They've pointed out that victim names have been accidentally exposed while politically sensitive information about powerful men gets carefully protected. That's not victim protection. That's using victims as a shield to justify a cover-up. The timing of this announcement is also revealing. Christmas Day, a major news dump on a holiday when most Americans aren't paying attention to political developments, when Congress is out of session and can't immediately respond, when reporters are on vacation and investigative journalism slows to a crawl. That's not an accident. That's a deliberate choice to minimize the impact of announcing that you've completely failed to comply with a federal law. And oh, by the way, you've got millions more documents you somehow didn't know about. And let's be honest about what's in those documents. We know from what's already been released that there's extensive evidence of Trump's connections to Epstein. Flight logs showing repeated private travel together. Emails documenting Trump's presence at Epstein's properties with witnesses to crimes. Photos of Trump with Epstein and Maxwell in social settings. A letter from Epstein himself claiming Trump shared his interest in young girls. Subpoenas to Mar-a-Lago for records related to the Maxwell prosecution. All of that came out in the limited releases so far. So what's in the million documents they just discovered? Probably more of the same. Probably extensive additional evidence of Trump's relationship with Epstein that the White House desperately doesn't want becoming public. Probably communications and records and witness statements that would make it impossible to maintain the fiction that Trump barely knew Epstein and had no idea what he was involved in. That's what's being protected here. That's what this cover-up is designed to hide. The frustration from the White House that reporters are describing is telling. They don't want the drip, drip, drip of damaging information coming out in waves. They'd prefer it all come out at once so they can respond to everything together and then move on. But that preference reveals that they know there's damaging material in these files. They know sustained releases keep the story in the news cycle. They know each new revelation gives critics fresh ammunition and makes it harder to change the subject. So their frustration isn't about the process being unfair. It's about the process not protecting Trump effectively enough. It's about each new document dump potentially containing information they'd rather stay buried. And the solution they've apparently settled on is to just stop complying with the law altogether. Claim you found millions more documents, claim you need more time, claim you're working around the clock, and hope that eventually people stop paying attention before the really damaging stuff has to be released. But we can't let that happen. We can't accept the Justice Department's excuses at face value. We can't pretend this is good faith compliance with a difficult mandate rather than deliberate obstruction of a law they find politically inconvenient. Congress needs to follow through on contempt proceedings against Pam Bondi. Courts need to intervene to force compliance. And the American people need to keep demanding transparency until we actually get it. Because here's what we know for certain. The Justice Department had plenty of time to prepare for this deadline. They had the resources to meet it if they'd prioritized compliance. They knew what documents existed in their own files, and they made a calculated decision to miss the deadline, over-redact politically sensitive material, and claim they've suddenly discovered millions more documents as cover for their non-compliance. That's not bureaucratic incompetence. That's institutional corruption. That's a Justice Department that sees its primary mission as protecting the president rather than following the law or serving justice. And if we accept this, if we just shrug and say, well, these things are complicated and maybe they really did need more time, we're complicit in normalizing a system where laws only matter when they're politically convenient and transparency only happens when it doesn't threaten powerful people. The Epstein files should have been released in full by last Friday. Every document that doesn't genuinely harm victims or compromise national security should be public right now. Instead, we're getting excuses and delays and a Christmas Day announcement of millions more documents as justification for weeks or months more obstruction. That's unacceptable. And everyone involved in this cover-up, from Pam Bondi on down, should be held accountable for their flagrant violation of federal law.